right, welcome back to the CBMW podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Swan, executive editor of Icon, a journal for biblical anthropology, joined as usual with Denny Burk, the president of CBMW. And we have a special guest today. You may know him as the executive director of Nine Marks, co-host of Pastors Talk podcast. You may know him as a seminary professor, author and editor of numerous books, or as an elder at Cheverly Baptist Church. Our guest today is Jonathan Leeman. Jonathan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jonathan. Great to be here. And Denny, always great to see you.
Yeah, how are we going to do this? This is my podcast host, Jonathan, and my other host, Jonathan. It's going to be very confusing.
Good.
I think we can manage.
Leeman.
Well, yeah,
Leeman. Swan.
Yeah,
there you go.
I may just have to do Swan and Leeman to disambiguate for our listeners.
Go. Okay, we can take that. We can manage that. We brought Jonathan on today. We want to discuss his book, Authority: How Godly Rule Protects the Vulnerable, Strengthens Communities, and Promotes Human Flourishing. Jonathan, let me just begin by asking, you've written numerous books. When you write one book, you're not writing another book. You might have. Why this book?
Yeah, in many ways, that book is the thread through all of my books so far, whether I'm talking about the church or the state and how those two things relate and so forth. The authority is the common denominator in a lot of my writing. I mean, I was a political, I did graduate work in political theory, political philosophy. So authority is just something I've always been thinking about. So that's the academic answer. The more personal answer is, one, God has just blessed me with godly parents and grandparents and pastors and professors who have exercised good authority in my life. And I've seen the effect of that good authority in my own growth. It's as I learned to submit, little by little, A, I grew spiritually, and B, I found myself being placed into positions of authority, right? And there's a lot of bad authority out there, and I wanted to talk and think about bad authority. That's what most of the books and articles these days are about. That's necessary. We have to talk about that. But I also want to talk about good authority, because the Bible has both, right? Authority in creation and redemption, good. Authority in the fall, bad. As Christians, we have to talk about both. And so that's what I try to do in this book.
Jonathan, I have a pastoral intern, and we were having a discussion last week. He's from the Pacific Northwest, and he said where he's from, just culturally, there's an allergy in the Pacific Northwest to authority, and which I thought was interesting, just as a regional observation.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there's not some kind of longer thread out of the Pacific Northwest and through our culture that just sort of is mistrustful of authority and hierarchies in general.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could speak to that, and how would you answer that?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, right? So I know the Pacific Northwest. I know exactly what he's talking about. Yeah, I would say our challenges with authority go back to Genesis 3, right? So this is not finally a cultural thing. This is a human thing. But I would say that allergy to authority was given philosophical legitimacy in the Enlightenment, right? And that's Descartes, right? Like, okay, if I don't listen to anybody, no other authority, how do I know I exist? I'm not going to listen to the Bible. I'm not going to listen to the priest. So that right there, that was the beginning of a philosophical devaluation of authority. And that's carried on even into our own moment, right? And the postmodern moment especially is just the throwing away of all authorities. And even more recently, I'd say in the last, 5 years, social media years, that's all we're doing is we're deconstructing and destroying all the authorities around us. So that's been especially the case. And it's happening in the church. So you get not just Me Too, you get church too. And you get stories of abusive pastors and so forth. And those things need to be called out, right? Let's talk about those. That's important, right? So I think this allergy to authority roots in the fall. It roots in our own Western moment. It roots especially in our particular social media moment. And so that's one of the reasons it's worth talking about. Now, is it more pronounced in, say, the Pacific Northwest than it is in Kentucky, where you are, Denny, or where I am in Maryland? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It manifests differently.
You mentioned Me Too and church too. Do you think, even in those responses, it seems to me that there's kind of an overcorrection to say, well, the problem here is authority. Anytime you have authority, you're just going to automatically have abuse. Is that the case?
Mm-hmm. I think there is something Christian about what's going on in Me Too and Church Too. That is to say, I do think we should oppose abusive authority. Christians should be first in line to oppose abusive authority. That said, yes, to answer your question, I think there can be an overcorrection. Absolutely. I remember seeing one writer in Christianity Today refer to authority as a quote unquote necessary evil. Well, let's just stop and think about that. What does God have? What does he give to Adam and Eve in creation? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion, right? Authority goes right to the heart of human existence. You exist, brother, sister, old man, young man. You exist to rule. That is why God created you, to image him as you rule over creation. So insofar as we throw all authority out and say it's all bad, yeah. A necessary evil, yeah, that's an overcorrection. Now, if we want to be cautious about it and say, look, fallen authority, however, man, that gets us into trouble, kills, oppresses, annihilates, hurts. Yeah, let's talk about that. That's your doctrine of sin.
Jonathan, you talk, and we're talking right now, just about the general angst that people have toward authority. How does a biblical authority help sort of resolve that angst? And what is biblical authority, or authority defined in scriptural terms?
Yeah, sure. That's where I just want to go back to the biblical theology I alluded to a moment ago, recognizing authority in creation, authority in redemption, versus authority in the fall. We need all three categories. And there's a sense in which a Christian, I'm looking down because I'm flipping to the Bible, a certain Bible passage here. There's a sense in which we as believers need to keep one eye on each. One eye on good authority, one eye on bad authority. The thing is, typically people have temperamentally, ideologically, they tend to look at one or the other. Some people are all about calling out injustice, bad authority. Whereas other people, often of a slightly different political leaning, or talk about the goodness of good authority. And I'm just like, hey, listen, our Bible gives us both, talks about both. Let's keep one eye on each at all times. You know, good authority, again, what does it do? It authority. It authors life. God in creation authors life with his authority. And he calls us to do the same with the authority he gives us. Think of the final words of David. 2 Samuel 23, he says, when one rules justly over men, ruling in the fear of God, he dawns on them like the morning light, like the sun shining forth on a cloudless morning, like rain that makes grass to sprout from the earth. Beautiful picture, right? Sun coming down and rain and a field of grass, and then with that rain and that sun, it rose up. It's a vibrant green. You're like, well, that's a beautiful field, right? Okay, that's what I want my wife and my daughters, my church members, and my the colleagues who work for me. That's what I want them to say about my authority in their life. I want them to testify, oh gosh, I am so grateful for my dad's authority. Man, it has made me strong. It has made me fast. It has made me holy. It has made me, on and on, whatever the domain is. Yeah, sometimes my dad is like, drew these, made sure I was home by such and such time. He posed he's kind. I didn't always like it, but man, it made me stronger. I'm so grateful for dad's authority. It is good. Right. So that's how I think we need to, and we want to talk about authority and give people a picture of such authority. Okay, that's the authority in creation. That's what it's intended to be. Then we have authority in the fall. But here's the solution. The solution to bad authority is not no authority. The solution to bad authority is good authority, right? It's redemptive authority. That gets us to creating a redemption. He did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Don't be like the Gentiles who lord it over. Okay, that's their version of authority. They're in the fall. Now let me give you my version of authority, says Jesus. Came not to be served, but serve and give my life as a ransom for many. What does that mean? Well, that means I'm going to use my authority to serve and to build up and to grow. That means I'm going to make commands, right? I'm going to say, hey, you need to do this. I'm going to draw a line, draw a boundary. It's real authority. But I'm doing it to what God intended in creation: build up, create, and in the context of the fall, to redeem. Right? I'm going to go into I'm going to go into Gomer's brothel. I'm going to go into Daniel's lion den. I'm going to reach down to the hurt and needy and seek to redeem and use my authority to that end, right? That's the goal. So I think our friends who are against all authority have instincts, have intuitions, and even probably have pictures in their mind of the good coach, the good mom, good teacher, who they know. Everybody wants to be on the good coach's team. Everybody wants to be in the home, hanging out in the home of the family, the great parents. So we all, I think, intuitively know there's something here. The minorities who are being oppressed in the 1960s, Alabama, Mississippi, was a solution no authority? Or was the solution to seek out other authorities, maybe federal authority in that situation, to come in and help and redeem? So, yeah, I think we have the opportunity here, and we've been missing it if we haven't, to paint a beautiful picture of what God intends, what Scripture shows us good authority can be.
Jonathan, you make a distinction in the book between authority and leadership. Could you explain that to us?
Well, authority is it's the authorization one possesses to exercise power, right? So I want to start by distinguishing between power and authority. What is power? Power is capacity, the ability to do that. Power to pick up a rock, power to solve a math problem, power to fix a leaky faucet. Authority is the authorization, the moral license to exercise that power, right? Now, when we talk about leadership, to your question, Denny, when we talk about leadership, that's more referring to the individual in that position and pointing the group to say, hey, let's go this way. Now, a leader typically will have authority, but not always, right? Sometimes we refer to sort of an informal leadership or an informal natural leadership, so that he's the kid on the playground who's not been authorized to say, hey, let's all play football. But he's the kid other kids just sort of naturally listen to.
Right.
Or in a work assignment in the classroom, 3 kids are going to make this project. He's the one or she's the one who...
It's kind of a force of personality.
It's a charisma. That's right. And leadership can be tied to authority, but doesn't necessarily need to be tied to authority.
Correct. So you could have somebody who's a natural born leader who everybody listens to, the kid on the playground, but he's not the one who's authorized by the state, for example, to teach the classroom. Even though he has those gifts, he doesn't have authority in that sense.
Now, when my wife, who is a kindergarten teacher, says, okay, Johnny is the line leader today, well, at that moment, she's authorizing him be the line leader. At that point, it's been formally established by the teacher, who, with every form of authority, you have an authorizer, right? And that is to say, let's just spin that out for a second. There really is only one absolute authority. No human authority is ever absolute. It's always relative to the authorizer, right? And in the situation of a classroom, with the kindergarten classroom, it's my wife, the teacher, saying, Johnny's a line leader.
Right. So somebody who's nervous about authority, who has an allergy to authority, it would be wrong then to say, well, authority just has no limits to it. In other words, if there is somebody who's authorizing a person to have power in a certain area, that authorization comes with certain kinds of limits. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we call that jurisdiction, right? So the police officer has a certain jurisdiction. The parent has a certain jurisdiction. The pastor, the toll booth operator, the airline pilot, the military officer, they all have a certain jurisdiction. So the authorizer comes and says, okay, this is the purpose I'm giving you power. I'm charging you with exercising power right here in this lane, but you got to stay in this lane. I'm not giving you power out there or over there, but right here. You have responsibilities, and you're accountable to me, the authorizer, in this situation. So yeah, a crucial aspect of thinking through and about authority is thinking about those lanes. What exactly is a lane that you're called to drive inside of? And so when people are like, yeah, authority scares me, we can say, yeah, it makes sense, because people often drive outside their lanes. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and get rid of the whole thing. You figure out what those lanes are.
So the bad authority, then, one of the characteristics of bad authority is when an authority figure goes outside of his jurisdiction. So, I think you use this example in the book, but, a police officer can pull you over and write you a ticket, but he can't tell you who to marry.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
As soon as he says, okay, you must marry so-and-so, or you must buy this house, he's outside of his jurisdiction. In other words, he's abusing authority at that point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Something, when I'm teaching this in seminary classes, something I'll say to the seminary students is, okay, who has final authority in a child's life, the parent or the state? And, these good Christian seminary students all quickly say, well, the parent. And I say, okay, well, what if the parent is abusing, beating, the child. And they scratch their heads and they say, oh, okay, well, in that case, the state. I'm like, yeah, exactly. Okay, but what if the state is saying, you can't proselytize your children or tell them that they're not this or that gender or whatever? And they're like, well, the church. Yeah, bingo, right. Okay, so the Lord has established, he's given the state a certain jurisdiction. He's given the parent a certain jurisdiction. And part of the challenge is in those areas like with Olympic rings, those jurisdictions overlap, and there are places they overlap, which is what makes it so hard. We find in ourselves, okay, what happened with the state and COVID, right? The state and the church, and some people are saying, this is the church's right. And other people, well, the state, no, they can protect lives, right? And so then we have these arguments. But I think step one is recognizing that certain areas, the rings of jurisdiction that the state possesses and the parent possesses and the church possesses and the pastor possesses, they overlap. Those are gray areas, and those are tough, and we got to work through them with wisdom. But yes, and one of the ways an authority can abuse itself is by going outside of its assigned lane, its assigned jurisdiction.
Okay, I'm supposed to be letting Jonathan ask a question, but I got to follow up on jurisdiction again.
Go ahead, Denny.
So this is CBMW.
Don't go to COVID. Let's not go to COVID.
I'm not going to COVID.
Okay.
In fact, COVID is pretty far afield from our mission here at CBMW. CBMW, It's a Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. We're concerned a lot about gender roles, what the Bible teaches about that. And I'm thinking of Ephesians 5:24, which says, Paul says, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Now, I know you and I agree. We both are coming from a complementarian perspective. We both believe that there is a God-ordained authority within every marriage relationship. The husband is called to be an authority there. But here it raises the jurisdiction question because he says wives should submit to their husbands in everything. It sounds like pretty broad, comprehensive jurisdiction. And so I just want to know what your reading on that would be.
Number one, I agree with it.
So good. Me too.
So that's good. Right.
Yeah. We start with consensus. Okay.
Right. And I think everything means everything. And, you think about a husband's authority in a wife's life, it's ultimately roots back in creation, right? And roots in dominion. And insofar as the call to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion, it is a comprehensive mandate, right? To here we go out in the garden. Okay, we got to figure this planet out and everything about it. So that is the domain in which the wife is called to align herself with her husband's leadership and headship. And it is in everything. Now, that's not all there is to say about it, though. So the extent, that kind of width, you might say, isn't the only thing to say about that form of authority. You also have to ask other questions like, well, what's an authority to do? And what kind of powers does he have to exercise or not have to exercise? Does he have the power to discipline his wife? Well, no. Now, I think a child needs to submit to their parents in everything within the domain of righteousness. Okay, let's leave sin out of it for a second. In the domain of righteousness, a child is to submit in everything. But does a parent have a power of discipline? Well, yeah, they do. Does a husband have power of discipline? Well, contrary to a few voices out there that I've heard recently, which are terrible, no, he doesn't have the power to discipline. So it's a different kind of authority, a different purpose. So the only question is not how wide is the jurisdiction. There's other questions we have to ask as well when we consider different domains.
Now that we're on that topic of submission, Jonathan.
Hold on, Jonathan. Did I anything in response from you on that?
No, it's good. And I think I know what Jonathan's about to ask you because you make a helpful distinction in the book on this.
Okay. Sorry.
Well, maybe, Denny, maybe you know my mind here. Complementarians, we're always having to define submission biblically and defend it and describe it. We're often accused of submission being denigrating and creating inferiority between the sexes. What is a biblical view of submission? How would it respond to that accusation?
Right. I understand that the incarnate Jesus submitted to God. Was that demeaning, dehumanizing, belittling of the Son in any sense? Does anybody say that? Do people say that? How do they respond to that? That's a real question. That's not a rhetorical question.
Oh no, of course, yeah. So the egalitarian argument is essentially is that if you have authority and submission within a marriage, you basically have a being. The wife would be a being who's ontologically inferior. So if there's role distinctions that have authority and submission, then ontologically they're less than. In fact, there's a whole chapter on that in the book Discovering Biblical Equality, making that case that to make these role distinctions makes male and female, husband and wife, ontologically different. One is superior, one's inferior, constitutionally speaking. So yeah, they do make that argument.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, so I wouldn't want to say that about the incarnate Son, though, right? And I assume they wouldn't either.
They wouldn't say what?
Affirming the incarnate Son's submission to the Father makes him ontologically inferior in some sense?
No, I mean, I don't think that they, no, I don't think they say that. No, but they do say it about the human beings.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess, does a child's submission to their parent make them ontologically inferior?
No.
So
no.
Why,
I mean, I don't think the view makes sense.
I know.
But
there's an inconsistency to that accusation, of course.
Right. But even then, and I want to be careful about using the child to the parents example, because I think a wife's submission to the husband isn't the same as a child's submission to the parents, quite, right? But I am trying to jerk the one point out of that. You would need to demonstrate to me why one's submission to another makes one's ontologically inferior. So that's the particular thing I would question and want to push back on. No, I would understand submission to be part of the beauty of how we image the Son, right? The incarnate Son, right? I would understand it shows something. We can't say God submits to his law quite, right? But there is a sense in which God is always acting, can I say, in accordance with, at all times, his own law, his own internal being. He never acts outside of conformity to his law. All right. I'm using the word conformity there just because it's not quite right to say he submits to it. Okay, so what is human submission then premised on? Well, it means it's about acting in conformity with God's own law. It's saying that God is the most beautiful, perfect, glorious thing in all the universe. And for us, just this morning, I was reading Psalm 119. He said, I love your commandments. Why does he love his commandments? Because he knows that God's commandments are infinitely good and beautiful and perfect. And so he wants to live according to God's commandments, because to live according to God's commandments is the source of ultimate freedom, right? And goodness. So why would I not want to conform myself to God's commandments? And so what is this whole thing we call submission? Well, it's about living little by little into God and in the likeness of God and according to God. That's what it is. It's, in that regard, life-giving. True submission, true obedience, and the Bible is a good thing. It leads to, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, right? Living according to the truth, I got to submit to the truth. I got to be obedient to the truth, because that's where freedom is. Freedom is not a pure removal of all constraints on me. That's not freedom. So I just want to start by investigating what people are assuming about submission and what they're assuming about obedience. Is that right? Now, I understand that a wrongful obedience and a wrongful abusive satanic authority, it becomes a terrible thing. Got it. That's authority in the fall. But now I want to talk about authority in creation and redemption and help redefine your view of what submission is. And to make this really personal in my own life, it was when I submitted to my pastor way back in our late 1990s as a 24-year-old nonconformist, rebel, nominal Christian. Right? Like, I'm smarter than everybody in the room. Let me ask questions to stump the pastor jerk guy. That was me. And it was in a crucial moment, which I talk about in the book, when the pastor said, Jonathan, I'm asking, well, he said to the people who were sitting in the room, I'm asking you to trust me on this. And it was sort of my rich young ruler's moment. I didn't have a lot of money to give up, but I had a lot of pride to give up. And for some reason, the Holy Spirit in that moment worked in my heart to think, yeah, I should submit to him. I should trust him. You know what happened? I grew dramatically. And eventually I started being given authority. And I remember looking back on that moment thinking, wow, there there's something about submission that evangelicals don't seem to understand. We never talk about it as a good thing.
It's a blessing.
Now, I understand if you've been in an environment with a lot of abuse of authority, I understand that you're going to be like, yeah, okay, well, let's talk about that too, authority in the fall. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's something good and beautiful here.
Jonathan, you make a distinction in the book between different kinds of authority. One you labeled authority of command and the other authority of counsel. Can you talk to us about that distinction and why it's important?
Yeah, the key difference, but they're both real forms of authority, and the word counsel throws people off. So, Denny, maybe you can help me find a better word for it.
By the way, did you come up with these labels, or did you read this elsewhere? Is this original with you?
I thought I read it in Oliver O'Donovan, but years later I went back, and so I kind of created these two categories, thinking I got what I got from him. But then I went back later and I read it him again, and I'm like, well, that's a little different. So.
Okay, I was just curious about that. Okay, tell us what it is.
Yeah. The basic idea is you have two forms of real authority, and by real authority I mean the right, the license to bind a conscience and say you must, to give a command. You must do that, and the person is now under moral obligation by virtue of that command, by virtue of the office you possess, to say, oh, I must do it.
Which is the difference between authority and leadership. A leader can tell you to do something, but you're not morally bound to it.
Right.
Authority means, when you're told to do something, you're bound to do it morally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And the difference then between these two kinds of authority of command and counsel, is that with authority of command, you have a discipline mechanism. You have the right not only to command it, but to enforce it. And if you don't enforce it, I'm going to discipline. Whereas in authority of counsel, you don't hold. There is an enforcement mechanism. It's just that you don't hold it. Jesus does on the last day. Jesus on the last day will say, you should have submitted. I told you to submit, but you didn't submit. But the authority holder themselves do not hold that enforcement mechanism, that right to discipline. And by the way, just brief tangent. You know where the final authority is in any organization or any body by who has the right to discipline, right? Okay, so let's go to the state. The state has the authority of the sword. They have the right to kill you or put you in prison. That means they have final authority. They have an enforcement mechanism, power of the sword, right? You think about parents of young children. They're the final authority. How do we know? They have the right of discipline. They have the power of the rod, however you want to interpret that. They can say to the child, go to bed. Time to go to bed. I don't want to go to bed. It's time to go to bed. You must go to bed or else, right? What about a church? Well, as a congregation, someone would say that the entire congregation possesses the authority, the keys, the right to excommunicate, right? The pastors can't do it by their lonesome, or if you're an Anglican or Presbyterian, fine. The pastors, fine. The bishop has it or the presbytery has it. Okay, what about a husband? Does a husband have the right to discipline? Think through the law, think through the histories, think through the wisdom literature, any place you can think where the husband has a right to discipline. The Gospels, Acts,
to discipline a wife.
To discipline a wife.
Yeah.
No, he does not have an enforcement mechanism. That's why I'm calling it authority of counsel. And Denny, you and I, as good Baptists, would say, elders don't have it either. Pastors don't have it either.
Right.
An elder can go to the church and say, we need to remove so-and-so. They have a leadership there, but you can't you can't go to the pastor's office and he's like, you're out. No, he doesn't hold the keys. The church holds the keys. So husbands and elders, pastors, have authority of counsel, which changes how they have to exercise, changes the nature and the way that authority gets exercised, because they don't have an enforcement mechanism.
So how do they lead then? They don't do it by, you're standing behind with the rod, obviously. Yeah. So what is the means by which a husband leads, if that's the case?
Yeah, his authority is you might say it's invitational almost. It's like Jesus in his first coming. Did Jesus in his first coming come with the sword? Did he force? No. Did he invite? Yes. Follow me. Leave your nets. Follow me. Now, Jesus in his second coming will come with sword, an authority of command. But interesting, in his first coming, he comes as an authority of counsel. And what are husbands told to be like? And what are under shepherds told to be like?
Right.
And I say it changes the nature of authority in several ways. Number one, it requires much patience, right? You're playing the long game. Teach with all patience, says Paul to the elders, right? Whereas, your little kid, your 3-year-old doesn't want to go to bed, go to bed now. Policeman says, slow down your car now. Whereas with your wife, you don't do it like that.
No.
You're working for oneness, and with your members, you're working for righteousness over time, right? You're inviting them into that, saying, hey, this is the way. God said this is the way. Let's go this way. Number two, it requires presence. Authority of command doesn't require the king to be present. He can announce his edict. Whereas an authority of counsel requires presence. I'm looking at my wife. I'm reading her body language. I'm assessing where she's at. I'm trying to understand my members. So I'm told to live with my wife in an understanding way. All right. So it requires me to be with them. Third, it requires me to honor them as equals. It's a form of authority established for the sake of collegiality and partnership. So she's my helpmate, right? And so here we are trying to take dominion together. And I'm looking at her whole, I'm living with an understanding way. I'm looking at her whole resume of gifts and skills. I'm like, okay, man, I really want to take this mountain. And she's really good at that. She's not as good as that. And I'm not good at that, but I'm good at that. Okay, how can we do this? Okay, babe, let's go this way. Let's do it this way. Right? So it involves, it's suited to partnership, right? And again, it's one that I think how do you exercise it? I love the elder qualification that says an elder must be sober-minded. What does that mean? It means he's not drunk on circumstance. He's not drunk on fear, tossed about. He's heavy, he's sober-minded. He trusts that God has given him his headship. God has made me this authority. Let's go this way. I'm not going to raise my voice. Weak men scream. I've raised my voice with my kids on a few occasions. Why? Because I'm scared. I'm weak. Strong authorities don't do that. They know that God has put them in this place, made you an elder, made you a husband, and babe, this is the way. Congregation, this is the way. They're sober-minded about it. They're heavy. They trust the sovereignty of God.
So the difference between authority of command and authority of counsel is, husbands, and we would say as Baptist pastors, we have authority of counsel because we don't have a means of enforcement behind our authority. Whereas the state, parents, a congregation, they all have a means of enforcement. What do you do?
I would say, just to qualify that real quick, I would say parents of young children. Now, as the child moves,
right,
adolescence, and then finally into young adulthood, at some point it sort of attenuates, it lessens. And for a while, it becomes more of an authority of counsel, and then it becomes a form of it. So it changes with the parent. But
no, I know. Our oldest just went to college this last year, and I told everybody we're in authority purgatory right now because the summer after high school and before college, our child was still submitting to us gratefully, but we told folks, our authority is changing right now. We're moving from an authority of command to an authority of counsel in her life. It's just weird, Well,
you exercise it differently, though, right?
It does. So, there's no more grounding. There's no more, all that stuff kind of, lays aside. And once the child's an adult, you've got to recognize that. But what I was going to ask you is what's a person to do? I'm thinking of a wife right now where she's in a situation where, her husband has authority of counsel with her, but he's treating her like he has an authority of command, and he's trying to enforce things physically or by intimidation. How are we supposed to think about that? And specifically, how's a wife supposed to think about that?
A member of my church has a college friend who she's talking with regularly. And in that church, they teach husbands have the right to discipline.
Oh, my goodness. And
I think that's wicked. I do.
Yeah.
If a husband is physically disciplining his wife, which is what's going on here, I think that's wicked. Let me just start there. Okay, let's suppose you're either in that marriage or maybe something less, a form of intimidation. He's kind of leaning forward. What is a wife to do? I think number one, she should get out of the way. Number two, she should talk to her elders and say, yo, I need some help here. Right. And I know that can be very hard and scary to do. And I know elders aren't always helpful in those situations. Nonetheless, I do think you need to talk to your pastors, talk to your elders. I mean, genuinely, if it is physical, if there is any sort of physical assault going on there, and that is the word I'd want to use, or the threat of physical, you're afraid, I do think you need to get out of the house.
Yeah.
I think you need to
call
flee.
the police.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Call the police. Absolutely. 100%. So Now, at some point, that man then needs to be instructed
Oh yeah.
in a big way. He needs to be disciplined and instructed. So,
Yeah, I've heard these stories, Jonathan. I don't know anybody personally, like you just had a personal connection, but I keep hearing stories I read on the internet of these groups who are making the case for corporal punishment for wives, which I don't know how else to interpret that except that it's just abuse and frankly,
an assault.
yeah, exactly. And that's not what we're talking about when we talk about authority of counsel. It doesn't give that to a husband. When he does that, he's abusing his authority, and he actually is not authorized by God to do that.
Bingo.
Whenever I teach on these things, I tell people, yes, it's for Ephesians 5:24. As the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Paul did not mean that husbands are free to defy God's authority and expect other people to follow them into that defiance. The apostles said when they were told to stop preaching the gospel by rightful authorities, they said, it's better for us to obey God rather than men.
Yeah.
And so
right.
when you have a subordinate authority contradicting a higher authority, God's authority, you have to go with the higher authority, God's authority.
Yeah,
so a woman a wife would never be called to submit to sin or submit to abuse in that sense. Because a husband doesn't have authority to do that. He's actually defying God's authority when he does that.
I'm so glad you're bringing all this out, brother, because I feel like, I think you and I have talked about complementarians like us need to be, let's not wait around for the egalitarians to say these things. Let's be first in line to say these things because we're interested in good, godly authority. This is
Absolutely.
not. Let's call it out and say, not that. Let's not be so
Right.
panicked that we want to protect good authority that we refuse to call it bad authority. So I'm so glad you're bringing this out. And I do have one chapter in the book in which I talk about the limits of submission. One of them is when they ask you to sin. Another one of them is when they go outside of their jurisdiction. And the third one is when they cause sinful, wrongful harm. So yeah, if you're being harmed, you should not submit.
Jonathan, throughout your book, I was just jotting down examples of where godly authority and submission might seem counterintuitive to our culture. So you talk about disciplining a child, how it actually makes them miserable, self-absorbed rather than happy children, well-ordered, well-adjusted children. You say submission grows us for leadership, and that good authority is actually seen by giving away authority. Can you just speak to this counterintuitive biblical authority from Scripture?
Yeah, I use the example in this book of teaching one of my daughters to drive, and she's kind of absent-minded, and we're heading towards a red light, and she doesn't see it. I'm like, sweetheart. She's like, sweetheart. Car, screeches to a halt. We drive home, and I walk in, and I say to my wife, honey, that girl, let me just tell you, that girl will crash one of our cars. Just prepare yourself now. It's going to happen. Gratefully, my prophecy hasn't turned out to be true. And as soon as I said that, we both thought, are we crazy to let her drive? Like, why are we doing that? Like, that's just, but almost as quickly, we also thought, that's how you grow. The people in authority have to take risks. And that's how you grow. And this is a lesson I learned by watching my pastor, Mark, my former pastor, Mark, over years, just pass out authority. Let other young men teach the sermon or teach the Sunday school class. Let other men chair the elders meeting or chair the members meeting, creating opportunities for others to grow. And what do you have over time? We have this church with all these leaders and a deep bench and lots of discipleship happening because what is he doing? He's passing out authority continually. And that doesn't, in some ways you could say that lessens his authority, right? Because he's not teaching the class. He's not chairing the meeting. In other ways, his authority is not a threat, He says he's willing to lose in every elders meeting. He'll lose an elders vote, right? Well, what happens if you're the senior pastor or the lead teacher or whatever, and you never lose? Well, what you're saying to all the budding teachers and budding preachers and budding leaders around you is like, I'm in charge. You're not going to finally grow here. Might as well go elsewhere. And they're not. They're going to go elsewhere. They're not going to grow. So, you as a top leader in any organization need to be willing to lose votes. You need to be willing to be corrected. You need to be willing to be wrong, right? And that is how you grow other people around you, as you're passing out opportunity, you're delegating. Genesis 1, the ruler of all things. What does he do? He gives charge of the planet to Adam and Eve. Could God have done it better? Yes. But still, he let us run the red light, because he wanted to teach us to drive.
Well, Jonathan or Leeman, Denny, did you have another question?
Yeah, I wanted to, one last thing. I know we're at the very end. We're stretching our time. Do you have time for one more question?
I do.
Okay,
I'm
great.
just
All right,
sitting
good.
Here.
Excellent. So within our own denomination, we're all happen to be Southern Baptists here. We've had some controversies over the last few years about authority and office within the church, our church structures, particularly with respect to women in ministry. And we've had a number of different people making the case that women can preach on Sunday mornings in churches, and it's no problem. I trace back some of that point of view to a little book that I think it was Kathy Keller. I don't know if Tim was a co-author on it or not, but she wrote a book called Jesus and Gender some years ago. I think it's about 12 years ago, actually. And she made the case that, look, anything that an unordained man can do in ministry a woman should be able to do as well. And so if you're doing like what you just said with, Dever taking a guy and putting him up and letting him preach every now and again or teach a lesson to the whole congregation, if a guy is doing that, then an ordained guy is doing that, then a woman ought to be able to do that, so long as she's not doing so as an elder. She's not holding the office. So as long as she's not holding the office, she can perform the functions of that office. How would you speak to that? And do we need to define function and office more clearly here? Would that help?
Sure. Well, what her argument presumes on is that Paul's phrase, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man, she's treating it grammatically as a henditus, as if it's a one thing, like nice and cozy, two words, but one thing. And so she is equating authority with a particular kind of teaching, right?
To teach with authority.
Teach with authority. And so long as
like
he's
teach
teaching
as an elder.
Right. So long as she is teaching not with authority, but under the authority of the elders, then it's a fine thing. And I think it's been amply demonstrated in the quote unquote literature that you don't read that phrase as a henditus. They're related things, no doubt, but they are separate things. So what I understand Paul to be saying, women, you're not to exercise the authority of the elder, and you're not to teach. And in part because teaching is an exercise of authority, yes, but it is a distinct thing in and of itself. So I would just say she's not reading the text well. I think the Bible couldn't be clear. Don't permit him to teach or have authority. Okay, so she shouldn't be, when men are present, she shouldn't be teaching, is how I'd respond to that particular thing. In terms of the teaching function, what he said, the office function thing, and can women be pastors but not elders, because pastor is a function and elder is an office. One, that's disingenuous. You're making the distinction so that you can make an office called pastor that's not an elder. You're not doing this just to say, hey, Shannon Leeman's very pastoral, and she is. My wife is very pastoral, but that's not what that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about giving them a place in the church budget, an office with a name on the door, and you're giving them an office. That's why we're having this conversation. So don't tell me there's a distinction between office and function, and then make an office out of the function.
Right.
Number two, okay, let's talk about that title of pastor or shepherd. Have you ever known any shepherds that don't have authority over the sheep? That's the whole thing. Yeah. Moses was a kind of shepherd. God uses that language. David was a kind. God called himself a shepherd. Jesus was the good shepherd, and we're under shepherds of the good shepherd. The entire metaphor throughout, and just in actuality, what it is, and in Scripture, is predicated on the fact that it's exercising authority.
Mm-hmm.
So don't tell me you can separate those two things. It's just, again, it's disingenuous. And then third, I would say, what are elders called to do? Shepherd the flock. Acts 20, right? Shepherd the flock. Okay, so if the job of eldering is shepherding, then what's the job of shepherd if not also shepherding, or is elder somehow different than, it's just, the word is always used together in conjunction with elders. They shepherd. That's what they do. 1 Peter 5, same thing. So the whole thing, to me, feels like, can we separate pastor and office, elder and pastor? One's an office, one's a gift, or one's a function. It just feels like motivated reasoning. I have a conclusion I want to reach, and I'm going to kind of not look at the things I don't want to look at and kind of make up other things that I want to make up. I don't know if you were asking for all of that, Denny, but I've been thinking about talking about that
that's
stuff
what I was
lately,
looking for.
There it is.
So an office then is, how would you define office then in that framework?
Yeah, an office is Charles Hodge's got a beautiful definition. I memorize, but the basic idea is an office is a job or a set of responsibilities that have been assigned by an authorizer to discharge with requisite authorities to discharge those particular responsibilities and duties, right? So I'm stepping into it. Somebody's authorized me to step into this job, and inside of this job, I have responsibilities and I have duties and the authority to carry them out. So
you can't really, I mean, if you're functioning in a certain way and you're authorized to function in that way, that's an office.
Absolutely, 100%, yes.
So they can't really be divided, because once you have the authorization to function, you're in an office, whether people are calling it that or not. It essentially is an office.
And that's why, and I'm going to be careful using this word disingenuous. I don't mean to indict people's motives. I don't mean to say they're trying to be devious in this. I trust that the people making these arguments are doing so, let's just say, for good reasons, right? They want to make sure that women are being honored and allowed to do all that Scripture allows them to do and calls them to do, and that people are being fulfilled in doing the work that Christ has called them to do. So let me just assume the best motives here, not trying to restrict what the Bible doesn't restrict, and I'm thankful for those desires and passions. At the same time, I can't find another word, but there's something disingenuous about it, because what it's saying is, hey, let's distinguish office and gift, but we're doing it to make an office. That's what is happening. And so,
and what I've
motivated
observed,
reasoning.
I've observed, I think people have different motives. I think some people, they're just pushing the boundaries because they kind of want to push towards egalitarianism. I think those people are out there, and it is, I think, fair to call that disingenuous. I think other people, it seems to me, they're just a little confused about the function of pastoring, and they think of pastoring as making disciples. In other words, so they'll say pastoring, but what they really mean is, I'm just going to disciple somebody, help them to be more like Christ. And they think that's pastoring.
Yeah.
When pastoring is actually as a function, it involves leadership, protection, provision, and that's not always a part of making a disciple. So they've kind of confused concepts. So I think if people could kind of keep those concepts distinct, it would help a ton.
Well, and that making disciples is what a pastor does. So there's what you have going on there is a kind of professionalization of the Christian ministry and the Christian life. You don't need an office. You don't need a staff member. You don't need somebody on the budget in order to make disciples. That's the priestly office. Priestly and kingly office are all given, and that's beautiful. And we don't need to professionalize it. So part of what's going on in the background is a more pragmatic, more business-minded sense of how the Great Commission is going to go forward, right? There's just kind of late modern assumptions that we got to hire people to do these things. If you're going to honor women, you got to hire them. Well, let's just think about that for a second. Why hire for the sake of making women get discipled and do the Great Commission? So there's a host of those other assumptions that I think are worth calling out.
Denny, Jonathan, I am going to exercise my host authorities of command to conclude this.
You can hit the button and turn this off.
That's right. I can exclude you from this meeting with my command authority. Jonathan, thanks so much.